welcome back to my channel. I recently finished a year-long crochet temperature blanket for 2023 and I couldn't be happier with it. As someone with ADHD who really struggles with finishing personal and creative projects, I'm honestly feeling really pleased with myself that I made it all the way to the end of this project and that I get to enjoy this perfectly imperfect blanket as a reminder of something that I worked on that was unrelated to school, unrelated to work over the course of a year. So for today's video, I'm going to reflect on how I decided to take on this project in the first place and talk a little bit about what I learned from this project now that it's done as I continue on in 2024 and take some of those learnings and apply them to creative projects that I am taking on for this year. I've got my little insert here, which is my knitting and crochet project book. I used to house this insert in my blue traveler's notebook, but I actually gifted that cover to my sister at the end of last year as part of her Christmas present. So it's kind of floating around right now on my shelf. I might add this to my ink log and pen log traveler's notebook, but I haven't decided yet, so it's just a standalone book. It's not really that full, but the intention is that I'm just documenting some of the projects and patterns that I'm trying and just making some notes on how it's going. I know you can do this kind of thing on websites like Ravelry, but I prefer to keep my records in a book like this just because then I can just reference a book as opposed to having to log onto a website and reference something online. So that's just a personal preference, but anyway, this is the book that I used to help me keep on top of this year-long project. When it comes to choosing a creative project, the first thing that I needed to figure out was, what was I looking for? I started getting into crochet at the end of 2022 when I was going through a bit of a rough period with work and school, and I was really looking for something that I could do with my hands and didn't require the computer or technology for the most part. Because I do knit, but I'd always been really curious about crochet, and I've had trouble learning crochet in the past, but I thought I've never tried learning crochet from watching YouTube videos, and so I thought it would be a fun project to take on. It would give me something to focus on and an excuse to use up some of the yarn that I already had on hand. And I loved it. I made coasters. I experimented with making some pencil cases that had varying levels of success, so I house a lot of my crochet supplies in here, and it's definitely not professional, but I really enjoyed these projects. I also made this pouch for my keys, and I had originally planned on doing a zipper, but I'm not really the most skilled at sewing, and so I took a shortcut and I decided to try making a little, adding a little button on. So I got really into the idea of making practical items with the yarn that I already had. So it was around November or December when I first came across the concept of a temperature blanket. And temperature blankets can be kind of polarizing from what I understand. So some people love the concept and some people find these projects really challenging to do because it can take a year to complete the project unless you are referencing a year that has already passed. But personally for me, I was fascinated by the idea of taking on a project that would take an entire year to complete. So in case you are unfamiliar with what a temperature blanket is, the pattern that I used, which came from TL Yarncraft, is this square a day pattern where you crochet a square that represents the temperature for the day. And the idea is that you add a square for every day based on the temperature. And then by doing that for a year, you can end up with this blanket that represents the entire year of temperature. I think some of the more traditional approaches of a temperature blanket is like if you do a line a day, so eventually you end up with 360 rows of different colors depending on what you denote. So what really drew me to the idea of taking on a project like this was that I could visually see the progress of the blanket throughout the year. So every day that I would add a new square, I'd be able to see physical evidence that I was working towards the completion of this project. I also really liked that it would only take me so much time to complete a square, because with projects like this, they were on the smaller side, but still substantial enough. This pouch actually took me quite a long time to put together because I had to create all the different squares. I had to learn how to stitch them all together. I had to learn how to make a lining. I had to learn how to sew a zipper onto the lining. And then I had to learn how to attach this liner into this pencil case. And then for this one, it's just 2 granny squares, but I still had to kind of figure out how to bring them together and then how to make a flap. And so I didn't actually have a pattern for this, which is why this flap is kind of wonky. But the thing with these projects is it was hard for me to stop working on them until they were done. And I really liked the fact that I could embrace the fact that this blanket would take a year to finish, so I didn't really have to rush. I was working towards something that was going to be really great in the end. I liked that it was something that I couldn't rush and that it had forced stopping points to prevent me from hyperfixating and giving into my impulse to just keep going and going until the project was complete. I liked that it was something that didn't trigger me to overthink the project. So it had enough structure where I knew, okay, I'm going to sit down and I'm just going to do one square. Never mind the fact that you can see that it's a little wonky, and that's just because I'm a beginner crocheter and I'm very comfortable with that status. So I wanted enough structure that I could still do something creative with my hands that didn't involve screens, but not so void of structure that I would end up feeling overwhelmed with the possibilities and putting pressure on myself or overthinking the outcome. So I find sometimes with drawing, I do get caught into traps where I overthink the hobby of drawing, and it doesn't end up being restorative for me because I haven't quite figured out how to have a healthy relationship with practicing drawing, just because it really triggers a lot of my perfectionism tendencies. And I'm actually working on that for 2024, but it wasn't something that felt like it would be a healthy practice to focus on last year, given everything that was going on in my life and knowing what type of behaviors and reactions it triggered for me. Another thing was I liked that this would give me quick wins. So instead of the only win for something like this being when it was actually finished, I would be able to physically see as the year went on this blanket take shape. And I also really liked that it was something that would be useful and have long-term value. So when it comes to crocheting in general, I try to pick projects that I feel will have a lot of long-term value for me. So I like making things that can still be valuable when I'm finished the project. And then in terms of tracking the temperature, what I did was I picked my color palette and I assigned temperature ranges for them. And then I just noted down what I was generally doing. So I was using the linen stitch square. This was based on TL Yarn Crafts pattern, which I will share in the description below. I used her join as you go method in order to be able to pick up on the squares. I focused on the high daily temperature. I did write down how big each square was, and then I'll be honest, I messed this up about halfway through the year, and there was no way that I was going to unravel half a year's worth of work to fix it. And so I just accepted that I kind of made a mistake. And you can actually see the beginning of the blanket was the squares were a lot larger, and by the end they were tighter and smaller. So there was a bit of like tension changes going on as I went throughout the year. And then some of my squares actually became a little misshapen, but I'm okay with that because I would still consider it a success. And so yeah, I wrote down the hook that I was using just so I could make sure I was using the same hook. Then I created a legend for myself, so whatever the temperature of the day was, I would always be able to reference what color I had assigned for it. And I do have some regrets on the color palette I chose because I did look at the temperature for the previous year and I used that as a guide for how much I thought each color would show up. And as you can see in this photo that I took of the finished blanket, I have a lot of this color, and when I bought this yarn, I thought it was going to be a lot warmer, and it ended up being a lot more of like a cooler toned color. Sometimes people will assign colors based on temperature. So for example, like the hotter temperatures, they'll do like the oranges and the reds, and the cooler temperatures, they'll do like the blues and the purples. But I just decided to forego that and to assign colors that I liked to what I thought were temperatures that would be more frequent. And I was a little bit off. So if I were to do something like this again, I would probably focus more on comparing it to like an average of the previous years in order to determine how much yarn to buy. And then on this side, I just tracked the temperature for the day. So this was just a place for me to keep track of the days that I had crocheted so that I kind of had a sense of where I was. Because I will be honest, I didn't necessarily crochet every single day, and going into this project, I knew that it would be too much pressure for myself to expect myself to sit down and crochet every single day. So early on, embrace the possibility that I might have to do batch updating. And so sometimes I would have a few weeks at a time where I would do one square every night. And then there were other times in the year where I would sit down and I would have a week to catch up on. And a couple times I had several weeks to catch up on, especially when I traveled. I kept on track for the most part, and when I got to December, it's not like I had months to catch up on. So I'm really pleased with how I set myself up for success, in that I didn't create so many rules for myself that I was going to fail. So in terms of the actual blanket, I'll admit that the first month was really messy. The perfectionist in me went through quite a few cycles of crocheting several squares and then unraveling it all because they were uneven and my tension was all off, and I got really frustrated sometimes. But somewhere along the way, I just let go of trying to force it to be perfectly even on all sides. But that didn't take away from my enjoyment of the journey of putting together this blanket. And now I have this awesome, colorful blanket that brightens up our gray couch and is really nice to curl up on at the end of the day or on the weekend when we're watching TV or watching a movie. It's so great, and I feel very connected to this blanket, and I'm really proud of seeing it and the fact that I stuck with it for an entire year. So now that we're in 2024, I've decided not to do another temperature blanket because I feel like I got everything that I wanted out of this project, and I'm ready to take on a few different crochet projects. So I'm trying to pick projects that will use what I already have on hand, as opposed to me having to buy new yarn to support a new project. But I did want to continue on with taking on some long-term, slow projects that can only progress as fast as each day passes. And this year, the two projects that I've really taken on or committed to are my 5-year Hobonichi Techo, which I've talked about before, and my A6 like fun journal, where I'm kind of trying to develop a healthier routine and habit around my drawing practice, because it is something that I enjoy doing, but I get in my own way a little bit with trying too hard to overthink it and be perfect. And so I'm really trying to embrace free drawing and expressing myself through drawing, as well as expressing myself through written word. And the added benefit of this 5 years, I actually started this 5-year last year, but I'm really enjoying it this year because now I'm getting to see the comparison to the same day a year ago. And this past weekend, when I was updating some of my entries, I saw there was a day last year, around this time last year, where I wrote about a specific event that occurred that led me to making some really drastic decisions about my life. And in that entry, I wrote that I was feeling a lot of anxiety and pain and shame. But I also wrote that I had hope that in time, I'd be able to look back and reflect on how those difficult events would help me grow. And it's so amazing how much can change in a year. So that event actually encouraged me to recommit to this career pivot that I've been working on for the past few years. Then 1 year later, when I was sitting down to update my entry, I was able to record an entry that reflected where I am now and just how much better I'm doing, because I'm on the verge of finishing school this year and I'm taking steps towards my new career. And I've just been really appreciating the reminder of my personal growth, and it's really motivating to see how things go. And of course, like, I expect there will also be some moments where I am not doing so well compared to previous years, but I think just being able to have it all in one place is so wonderful. And at the end of the 5 years, I love the fact that I'll just have this book to reference, and I think it'll be a really important piece of my history and a place that I will go to when I'm looking for personal examples of when I've overcome difficult situations, or reminders of how far I've come in those moments where I'm really struggling. This book, on the other hand, is very time-bound to 2024, which I love, and I'm just having a lot of fun taking pressure off of drawing. So I thought I was going to be using a lot of watercolors and things like that, but I'm just trying to keep things simple so that I don't overthink the process. And so I've really just been using my beloved Pilot Vanishing Point with the extra fine nib and the platinum carbon black. And I've just been doing some sketches. And because this is platinum carbon black, I know that if I wanted to color in with like marker or watercolor or gouache or whatever in the future, I have that option. But I just haven't been putting that kind of pressure on myself. So this has been a really lovely year-long project, and I love that I am kind of bound to slowing down, and it progresses at the same rate of the year itself. And so by the end of the year, I'm hoping that I'll just have lots of pages of different explorations, or, you know, whatever I felt like indulging in for that day. And just like the temperature blanket, I don't necessarily find myself in here every single day, but it's not a problem catching up. And I've just been trying really hard to not put like too much pressure on myself to complete it. As I was reflecting on finishing this blanket and thinking about the parallels to some of the year-long creative projects that I have committed to for this year, I thought it would be fun to reflect on why these long-term creative projects have worked so well for me in general. I find that these projects really give me some type of routine and structure. So I've talked about this in some of my other videos as well, but as someone who struggles with ADHD and hyperfocus and impulsive behavior, I find that instead of hyperfocusing on a project that only has like one kind of main natural stopping point, which is when the project is done, I really like that these force me to slow down, and I only have one page dedicated to each day of the year. As I fill these pages out, there's an element of slowing down and just focusing on like one page at a time. And I really love that. I really like that it breaks things up into smaller chunks. Another thing that comes to mind is the fact that I would consider this a mindfulness practice. So I also struggle with anxiety and I'm always worrying about the future, but I really appreciate that these projects help me stay in the present moment. Like with the temperature blanket, I'm just thinking about the temperature of the day and picking the color that corresponds to the temperature and then completing my square. And then for here, I'm just thinking about the day. I've just got my one pen with my one color of ink, and I'm just drawing really the first thing that comes to mind. So here I wrote, this is a lamp that I almost bought, which is kind of half true. Like I saw this on Facebook Marketplace and fell in love with it, but didn't think we had space for it. So I thought instead of trying to have the physical lamp, I would just draw it and remember it as something that caught my eye. This is inspiration for our office, where I want to dedicate a wall of our office to create floating shelves where I can put all of our books and just increase the amount of storage in our home. So I really enjoyed this photo and I felt like it was a good representation of what I want to get Mike to help me build, and so I decided to sketch it out. And I just like that I don't have to really look at a screen, apart from maybe referencing like a photo if I'm sketching something, or double checking the temperature. But to complete the task, I don't really need a lot, and so it just allows me to stay focused on this one thing, and for however long it takes me to do my drawing or crochet my square, I'm not really thinking about much else, which is really great for me. And then similarly, it increases my focus. So the fact that I knew exactly what the parameters were for sort of completing my task for the day, it just allowed me to really sustain my focus, because I knew that it wouldn't take me too long to finish a square, or these sketches don't actually take me that long to do because I'm not aiming for perfection. I'm not trying to like monetize these in any way. I'm just having fun trying to visualize my thoughts a little bit. As well with something like my 5-year, I really like that I just use a pen and I'm just writing about my life. So I'm able to really focus on, the one task of like documenting something that's going on, or drawing something that's on my mind, or completing a square. And it also gives me a sense of achievement, which I really appreciate. So being able to complete this task in a matter of minutes, I found it really motivating, because I would feel this sense of accomplishment, and especially when I'm struggling with larger projects that are going on with work or with school that just take up a lot of my mental energy, something like this is very restorative and gives me that sense of satisfaction and achievement that I think can improve my overall mood when I go back to tackling those meatier projects that I tend to struggle with. Finally, I would say that this helped me reduce my stress. So for 360 days of the year, this pattern was exactly the same. It was just one square, and then when I hit a certain number, I would get to the next row and repeat. And then for the final days, I had this border. And same with these books. I put zero pressure on myself. Sometimes I do drawings. Sometimes I do my currently inks. Sometimes I do ink swatches, and I just try out different colors. So it's very much like just a colorful way to document small moments in my life. Not only does it kind of reduce my stress in the moment, but it's a physical thing that has long-term value in that I know that I'm going to enjoy flipping through something like this. I already know that I enjoy being able to flip through this 5-year, and it's only going to get better with time, which is very exciting and very motivating for me to stick with it. So overall, I just find that this is really helping me with manage my stress levels, because as someone who does struggle with anxiety and stress and tends to overload myself and get overwhelmed really easily, I find it's just so important to have a few things that I can lean on that are uncomplicated and simple and encourage me to slow down and stay focused in the present moment. So that is all that I wanted to chat with you about today. I'd love to know if you've taken on an intentionally slow project like this, and if so, what did you do and what did you learn in that process? And I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. While it's nice to align projects with the beginning of the year, it doesn't have to coincide with a calendar year. So if you're interested in taking on a project like this, please don't feel constrained to waiting until January of next year, and share some inspiration, because I'm always looking for new ideas and I love learning from you and being inspired by all of you. So please join in the conversation in the comments. And if you're still here, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon in the next video.